What's happening, Mr. Staples? We will. You got the party going on at the house. Folks that are in here, that's really loud.
Only so
Live,
much I can do here.
live stuff. Folks that are on the chat, we are waiting on not Jason. Jason is here along with a lot of little ones.
A little bit, yeah.
I was always told this is like the behind the scenes game plan. We'll get started here when Greg gets in here. But I was always told I had boys. I grew up in a household of boys, but my brother had girls, one girl, and he said his one girl and her friends were far louder than any of the boys ever
Oh,
were.
oh, I believe it.
Yeah, so I
I
feel for you.
100% believe it.
I feel for you. Uh, Waiting on Greg to join us. Greg has some stuff going on. But Jason, let me ask you a question outside of when Greg gets here. Oh, never mind. Here he comes. All right, let's get this thing rolling.
All right, let me check my levels here because it was doing something funky with them. How's that?
Yeah, you sound good.
All right.
Look at there. Let me pull myself down here.
Gentlemen,
Let me hold on. I'm still not there
I
yet.
don't know that I don't know that I'm comfortable with being called a gentleman. Yeah, that's presuming a little bit on in terms of my social class there.
Look, man, I feel like I'm driving a stick, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm not. How do I get rid of the stream starting soon, John?
This really is the
Hold on, there it is.
behind
There
the
it is.
scenes.
Oh, we want to get some of those already?
Oh wow!
All right,
Wow!
here we are. Let's get started.
Wow!
Everybody in here. You did not see any of that.
Oh
Welcome
man,
in.
Tommy, this you really are a new man now that now that you're not getting quite as big a check from the government.
Absolutely. And I saw Greg earlier today. We could talk about that for another show. That'd be interesting. Let's get it rolling. Welcome welcome everybody to the Game Plan Podcast, Inside Carolina's premier preview show. Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com is our sponsors. It is the game plan. That means that's Jason Staples. That means that's Greg Barnes. And I'm who am I and what am I doing here sometimes? Greg, I'll get you first since Jason and I have already been chatting a little bit. Carolina goes to Virginia. We kind of talked about it with David Teal yesterday on Next Level. It's been sort of the house of horrors up there at Virginia. Mac wasn't trying to hear it. Don't blame him. This is a big football game. I said last week's was the biggest game in MAC 2.0. I'm not there with this one yet. Might be by the end of this podcast. What's your overall take on Carolina going up to Virginia to get a win they need to get to sort of solidify that coastal?
well, look, some of these games are just easy. And what I mean by that is matchups matter. We've talked about that a lot over the years. And I really just think, regardless of the ghost that may reside at Scott Stadium, the matchup really just works in North Carolina's favor here. And we can dive into that. But Tony Elliott has come in, kind of put his stamp on the program, and it's not what people had expected, especially with a quarterback like Brennan Armstrong coming back. The offense has taken a step back. The defense has gotten a lot better. But that is a work in progress. And North Carolina is still a work in progress. But Carolina has figured out how to win on the road. They've done a lot of good things this year. They've won a lot of close games. They have a lot of momentum on their side. And I do think it's interesting. Mac Brown has not just downplayed, but has been a little bit brisk when people have brought up the 96 game, which means it still kind of gets to him, right? Which, I mean, it still gets the Carolina fans, so I totally get it. But that's one that speaks to the power of sports, Tommy, because that game happened my freshman year of college. And I've got a 16-year-old that we had a meeting with a college counselor last night, getting him ready for college. That's how long ago that game was, and yet it affects everybody that watched it and that knows about it whenever Carolina goes to Charlottesville. That speaks to how special sports are. That speaks to the power that the curse had over Chapel Hill. But the curse is long gone. It's been dead for a while. And even though that's still a tough place to play for Carolina, I think they have a lot of things working in their favor this year.
Jason, to Mac's point, at preseason or at earlier in the week press conferences, I mean, a lot of times they went up there, and Virginia has some good ball clubs. Virginia Tech too, for that matter. Over the years. To Greg's point here tonight, that is not really the case, and we'll dig into it. But Virginia's got some players. They're virtually the same players, except on the offensive line that they had last year. The defense has gotten a couple transfers, but they've gone from being terrible to solid. What do you make of the coaching changes and how they affect teams in general? I mean, it's just weird how it works, right? Some teams improve, some teams don't. Some units improve, some don't. I mean, what's going on here at Virginia?
Well, so much of it is about fit and about what different coaches bring to the table in terms of what they do best and what the players on their roster do best. And so, I think a lot of that is, I mean, you can see that in several of the teams this year that it's really visible. So if you look at Miami, for example, as everybody knows, I'll go out of my way to kick Miami when they're down. And boy, have they been down so far. So, but I mean, you look at Cristobal coming in, and a lot of people expected, thought that was a splash hire. He's a guy that's been able to recruit really well at different places and all that. And they obviously had a really good offense last year. And they bring in a former, the guy who's fresh off winning coordinator of the year last year. And all of a sudden their offense is just terrible. And you're like, well, what's going on there? Well, a lot of it, as we saw when Carolina played Miami, is the things that they're trying to do don't match up as well with the talent on that roster on that side of the ball as what they were doing last year. And on the flip side, on the defensive side, they're pretty good. So, and the same thing is going on right now in Virginia, where I think last year they had one of the best offensive coordinators in the country in terms of being able to be creative, use the talent that's on the roster, move guys around. I mean, if you look at last year's team for Virginia, one of the things that was most evident was how they used Keaton Thompson. They even listed him as a football player, right? Not as a wide receiver, he's just a football player, because they put him all over the place. He'd take snaps at quarterback, he'd take snaps in the backfield, he'd take snaps at tight end, at H back, at wide receiver, whatever, because they were doing everything they could to creatively maximize their offensive talent. And they just, it was, throw everything else out, find the, 6 or 7 things that work, do those, and then just move our football players around to try to get the matchups that'll help us in that moment. And now that coordinator, by the way, is at Syracuse. Syracuse offensively has been having a pretty good year, right? At a certain point, multiple points make a line, right? I mean, I think you've got some proof of concept with him as doing that. Elliott's a guy who, when Tony Elliott took over at Virginia, he's taken over after a decade at Clemson, and going back, he took over coordinator in 2014, 2015, 2014 or 15, somewhere in there. And so, about 8 years there, but Clemson runs they run a system. They have what they do, and it's based on, some basic scheme principles or whatever, but these are the things that they do. They know what they're going to do. They know their basics, and they don't move a ton of stuff around. It's basically designed to let their guys just win one-on-ones and play fast. Well, if you've got a bunch of T. Higginses and Sammy Watkins and Travis Etienne and an Elf a real life elf running around out there throwing darts, then yeah, that can work pretty well. Well, when you get to Virginia and the talent on offense is nowhere near that, especially on the offensive line, now you're having to move stuff around and all that. And I'm not seeing any real evidence that he's really doing anything different than what he did at Clemson. And that's kind of what you got. It's the fit with a lot of what they have on the roster. And the other thing is that they lost a lot of their offensive line. I think, what did they lose? I think all five offensive linemen.
Yes.
Yep.
That was the other thing, is those two things, the fit in terms of offensively between what he wants to do and what they have on the roster. And then the fact that they're replacing 5 offensive linemen and they're really not good up front. Well, there you have your answer offensively on what's been the problem. And defensively, it's just the attitude that they brought in, and they're well coordinated, and they've played pretty well.
Tommy, just to give you a couple stats to explain what Jason's hitting on there. And these are total offense, total defense numbers. I know those numbers are irrelevant, but my stats sound better if we just go with these. Last year, Virginia was 3rd nationally in total offense. They're currently 94th. Total defense last year, they were 121st nationally. They're 31st right now. So, I mean, it's like, it's wild. Sometimes you see one side of the ball take a big jump or drop back. We'll talk about that next week with Wake's defense, for example. But to see both sides of the line just go in completely opposite directions, it's crazy.
They ran a mesh route, and they slapped hands on going opposite directions there. Jason, no offense, but Brian Evans wanted to ask a question, and I don't want to linger too long, but I don't want to hurt you too bad. Is the 96 Carolina game at Virginia Carolina's wide right moment? You mentioned Florida State and Miami. I was just checking.
I think it might be.
I was just checking. I thought it might. I don't want to get you stirred up yet.
No, I think it might be. I mean, it really might be. If it's not, it's the wide left.
Let me ask a question here, staying on this same topic, because I think it's relevant to Carolina and what Gene Chiswick's done, and I'm going to bring it up. It's Slagle. Slagle's always asking the questions. And, Greg, I'll let you start with it. Good coaches adapt their system to the players they have. It is not that simple, is it not? I mean, there are not too many college football coaches that go around with the way they do things and that, they just change it all the time. These guys are set in their ways for the most part, right?
Well, they are, and they kind of have to be because you only have 20 hours a week with the kids. And so the challenge is you've got to figure out your film room study. You've got to figure out practice time, and you've got to get all that worked out. And with the number of guys that you have, I mean, like at the NFL level, you can build a brand new offense or defense for the most part in the offseason because you have plenty of time to do that. And you can scheme hours upon hours upon hours with your team in the preseason, even during the week if you have to. Cannot do that at the college level. So that's one of the things that the big shift that we were talking about it earlier today on the message boards. When Hal Mummy and Mike Leach showed up from Valdosta State at Kentucky in 1997, that was really one of the key points that changed how football is played. It's kind of the new modern era, if you will, because you start getting into minimizing the number of play calls and you get into concepts. So, we talked about that a lot, both Longo and Fedora. You only want to be able to call so many certain plays. That's because you want your guys to perfect the plays that they're working on. You don't have enough time if you've got 100 different plays in your playbook to perfect them at this level, just because of the hours involved. And so it's much easier, and you see this in basketball. Roy Williams always ran the same scheme, right? But he made minor adjustments. So you can do that, but the shell is always going to be the same for the most part. And within that shell, you have opportunities because you know what you have coming out of spring ball. You can make changes like that. But a lot of these coaches pretty much are who they are. And so they're the guys that can make adjustments during game week and at halftime are the ones that have a lot of success. Yeah, I found it interesting. last couple of years, we had a lot of conversations about Jay Bateman doing a good job once he got to halftime, and he can make some changes. Well, what's the conversation right now about Gene Chizik? You look at what they've done in the last month. They've been really good in the second half. And so that's really where it comes in. It's not a matter of rebuilding your scheme each year for each set of players that you have. You recruit to your scheme. But then it's really the guys that can adjust on the fly and make minor changes that allow them to get better. Gene had a lot of issues first month of the season in making any kind of changes. He wasn't good at anything. And so what we've seen the last couple of weeks, if they've made enough changes, while they're not good at everything, they're getting better at certain things, and that's why you're seeing a little bit better play from the defense.
Yeah, and certainly injuries will play. It'd be interesting to see how injuries affect things. Let me throw a question up here from Bull Hill, and we are going to get into Virginia itself shortly. But Jason, are we starting to believe the defense is turning a corner? If so, what are the reasons? I'll offer that they've picked something. To Greg's point, they picked something to do, and that was stop the run. I wonder how injuries to three of the four starters on that defensive front, if you count Ray Vahasek, will affect things. But is the defense turning a corner, Jason, from what you've seen, breaking down film, all that good stuff?
Well, so the problem is I think they kind of turned a corner this last week against Pitt in certain respects. But I'm not sure whether they can sustain the turn given the losses to injury that they just had. So, I mean, I'm still waiting to kind of see what things are going to look like without that extra depth and without some really key players on the edge. So, I mean, that's a concern. And yeah, I just don't I don't know what the answer is or what it's going to look like going forward. I mean, that's the question. And a lot of folks out there are going to have as good a guess as me, but I think in the other areas, I think the defense has looked significantly better. I think on some of the things that I nitpicked early in the year that were just really frustrating for me to see on film, I think some of those things have been significantly better the last few weeks. And especially on the defensive line, there's been some better fundamentals, and there's been some guys that have made some splash plays. I mean, you mentioned, they've had 4 or 5 guys at in any one game that have made some plays in the backfield. Rucker, you've had, I think, Miles Murphy's gotten healthier. I think this last week was the best we've seen Jahvaree Ritzie play, both fundamentally and in terms of being able to make some actual plays. So I think there's been some positive progress there. I think that the linebackers have actually played better the last couple weeks than they had before, though they didn't play against teams that really stressed them as much. With Miami and Pitt, they're just running the football on you. You got to trigger downhill and play that way, but they're not putting as much pressure on you in certain other areas. So yeah, I think it's been a bit of a mix, but overall they've definitely taken a step forward or a couple steps forward. And you compare what we're seeing now or you compare that to, say, the App State game.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And it's night and day. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty significant difference. So again, I think there's been some significant progress. I'm concerned about about how some of those losses are gonna impact things. But the good thing is that, I mean, if there is a good thing here, those losses are at spots where there's some depth. So, I mean, that's the good part.
Yeah, and Tommy, we need to kind of parse the details a little bit here. Had a lot of conversations on the message board with fans who are just looking at kind of the raw numbers. And you got to be careful when you're trying to decide, okay, is the defense getting better? Well, to Jason's point, yes, the defense is getting better. How much better? And that's where you kind of have to be careful, because you have to really take into account level of competition, special level of the offense that North Carolina's been playing. I think people would probably be surprised to know that when you look at defensive drive efficiency, which is the per possession scoring advantage a unit has against this opponent. The last 3 games, North Carolina has been negative defensively. And people say, well, how can that be? Well, Virginia Tech game, they were great. But Virginia Tech's offense is bad. But even though Carolina held them to 10 points, it wasn't like some miraculous defensive performance. It was good. It wasn't fantastic. But like the Duke game, for example, that was, in terms of efficiency, that was Carolina's 3rd worst defensive performance of the year. And they've, as I said, they've had negative totals the last 3 games because Pittsburgh is a good example. They really weren't good in terms of efficiency the first 8 possessions that Pitt had. Pitt was averaging 3 points per possession through the first 8. That's not good. That's like a team starting at midfield every possession. But the last 4, Carolina was great. And so fans just see that and say, oh, yeah, well, they're dramatically better. Yeah, they played the second half fantastically. Give them a lot of credit. And the problem for this defense, we'll say a problem and we'll say a benefit or a positive. The problem is that all the metrics that we talk about, there's not many opportunities left on the schedule for this defense to make a huge jump. Because really the only good offense they play remaining is Wake Forest. In terms of efficiency, Virginia, NC State, Georgia Tech are all 90th or worse. And so Carolina pretty much has to hold those teams to like 10 points like they did Virginia Tech to get a good boost. And so I say all that. And the positive, of course, there is because the offenses aren't very good other than the Wake. The defense is not going to be as stressed as maybe they were against App State or Notre Dame. That's a good thing because that means that the defense doesn't have to be great. They can just be average and it'll be enough for Drake May. But I say that just so people kind of understand that, yeah, the numbers may look better. That doesn't necessarily mean the defense has gotten dramatically better. A lot of it's about the quality of the opponent that they're playing. And so I think you have to kind of take that in when you're trying to get a full account. Is the defense getting better? Yes, for sure. They've cleaned up a lot of things. But this still is not an elite defense. I mean, in terms of defensive drive efficiency, Carolina currently is 12th in ACC play. So still near the bottom ranks, but those numbers still look a lot better than they did against Notre Dame and App State.
Y'all mentioned App State. There was a lot of patty cake being played on defensive front against App State, and that hadn't been the case, especially not when it came down to crunch time against Pittsburgh.
Even when they were giving up points against Pitt, it was not because they were just playing patty cake up front.
Right.
Yeah.
They were still getting some penetration. They were still, they're still playing better up front. Sometimes you just give up plays, and they gave up a bunch of plays in the secondary. And some of that right now, I'm not sure is all that fixable, at least in the season. But up front, it's a pretty big difference. I mean, it's a noticeable difference.
They are playing like we expected them to play when we were talking about this stuff in August. Let me ask you, Jason, last point on this, and then we'll get down into specifics with Carolina and Virginia. People are talking about, we're excited to see Travis Shaw get more snaps, Rucker get more snaps. One thing about having that depth is the guys can play 40 snaps or 30 snaps at full 100% capacity. When guys start going out, we don't know where the line is where people start declining on. If I play 50 snaps, I'm good. If I play 60 snaps, I'm probably falling off on my ability. How do you see this shaking out as far as snap counts now, Jason, with who's out there? I mean, Jacoby Cowan's played well. Everybody talks about KBJ and Keyshawn Silver, Travis Shaw and all these guys. Chris Collins is going to have to play a ton. Somebody said in the chat, the starters weren't very good when they were out there. Okay. Noah Taylor and Des Evans, those defenses, when they were playing, were not great. But it's not just about that, right? It's about everything that goes with putting snap counts on bodies on that defensive front.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's quite that simple because eating snaps matters. And I thought actually those guys played reasonably well. It's not that that the guys behind them just played better. Biggest difference in the second half is that Carolina was able to win a couple things downfield, and Slovis didn't make a couple of the throws that he made in the first half. But defensively, they actually handled things pretty well with those guys on the field in the first half and before they got hurt. So I don't want to say, oh, the backups will be better, because I just don't think that's true. Although I mean, again, I'll pound the table for Kamen Rucker. I like Kamen Rucker a lot, but Kamen Rucker playing 40 snaps is going to be a lot better than Kamen Rucker playing 60 snaps. And that's a pretty big difference. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of a difference this makes on the interior as much in terms of where those snaps go. I think the biggest difference, and we saw this in this game, is you're going to have to see Ritzy playing a lot more on the edge at that big end spot, sharing time with Rucker, instead of that being Rucker and Des Evans. You're going to see Ritzy there playing more there. So you'll see a little bit more size on the field at different points with him out there. Although, I mean, it's not like Evans is small. But Ritzy will get more time on the edge. That's going to make room for another defensive tackle, whether that's Silver, whether that's, I think Bingley Jones is probably the next guy up right now, given how, certain guys, given health and all of that. You'll probably see Bingley Jones get some more reps, 10 or 15 reps on the inside. You'll see Travis Shaw get an additional 5 or 6 reps, maybe 10 reps in a given game as a result of that. And, Hamrick is going to have to play on the other side as well. So that you're just going to see, I think Collins' reps are basically you're going to add a third to his, and then Hamrick is going to have to handle the rest of those. And then, basically you're going to see Rucker and Ritzy more splitting time at that big end spot. And then a few others get more time in there. Cowan is another one. Jacoby Cowan will get some time.
Yeah, and Rucker, is still on the injury report. So we shall see. Somebody ask about Rucker being 100%.
Yeah, and Tommy, there's legitimate reasons to be critical of coaches at all levels, because they're human. They make mistakes. We can talk about schemes and what fits best, all those things. I don't think we have any room to really talk about who's the best player and who should be playing. These guys watch their players every day in practice. They've seen them for dozens and dozens and dozens of practices throughout their careers that we have not. They knew who the best players are. I think it's very easy to be captivated by Kamon Rucker, who, look, some of his moves are phenomenal. I think we can all agree on that. But there's something in practice where maybe he's got splash plays, but some of his other plays aren't up to par. And you've got to weigh, okay, are we going with consistency or just the splash plays? I don't know what that is, but the coaches do. And so I think both you guys hit on the key point here. Forget about really who's starting. I think the guys who play the most are the guys who the coaches think should play the most. But depth is so critically important, because we talked about it just a few years ago. When you've got 2 of your key hogs up front playing the majority of snaps, it's not sustainable. But when you have injuries and you have depth, you can at least kind of fill in. And because you haven't had to rely on guys so much throughout the course of the year, you can mitigate it a little bit. You still don't want to have injuries where you have to plug in. But as long as you have that depth and you can pull from that depth, you're much better off instead of relying on just some guys. So Carolina, from that standpoint, in terms of roster management, has come a long way than they were just 4 years ago. This right now helps them with the injuries, but also helps moving forward.
Greg, you can't be serious, because, I mean, if these coaches really wanted to win, they would play the freshmen.
Well, Travis Shaw for sure, right?
Yeah, Travis Shaw and Zach
snaps a game.
Yeah, Travis Shaw and Zach Rice should be playing 100 snaps a game apiece at multiple positions. Just that's the way it is. Because if they really wanted to win, those guys are 5 stars, and you got to play your 5 stars no matter what. Because that's just how you win.
I do think that the point about splash plays versus consistency, and it's not just Rucker. I mean, if you got a guy that goes out there, Cameron Rucker's been great, but if you've got a guy that goes out there and gets it done for 5 snaps, can he get it done for 30 snaps or 35 snaps or 40 snaps? And that's the one thing that I thought was incredible with Strobridge and Crawford is those dudes were playing 80, and there was very little drop off from them throughout the game. They were gassed. But the faith of not playing anybody else, or the lack of faith to not play anybody else when those guys had that many snaps on them. Max said it in the presser. This is where recruiting comes in handy, and we'll see because they got the bodies. That's one thing. There have been cases where Carolina football did not have the bodies to put out there, and they put out a 220-pound. Who was it? I can't remember the guy's name. I can't remember. I don't want to call the wrong name. That just gets destroyed when he's not ready to play. It was years ago, folks. So don't
About
think
Kendall High.
Yes.
Yeah.
He. I mean, it was just ugly. And
he was 250, and he wasn't any more than 240, I think.
And he was just getting killed out there because they were.
Yeah.
But anyway. I think depth will be an issue. I don't know if it'll be an issue this week, but I'm going to talk about Johnny T-Shirt, and then we're going to talk about the game plan specifically against Virginia because I think there's some things in here for folks to watch. But Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com, great sponsors of the podcast, great friends of Inside Carolina. Go take care of them on East Franklin Street. Get the jerseys, the T-shirts, the sweatshirts, the blankets, stickers, anything you could possibly want from Johnny T-Shirt. They're alumni owned and operated. Great friends of you guys, the premium subscribers. Get the 10% off. You need it. It's Christmas time. God, is it already Christmas time? I heard that we were putting Christmas trees up in our house in a couple of weeks, which seems ridiculous. But yeah, Johnny T-Shirt will take care of your Christmas gifts for everybody. National guys will play the Bills. It's game plan on Thursday night. All right. Jason Staples, Greg Barnes, 9:37 on the East Coast. It is the Game Plan podcast. Let's talk specifically about Virginia here. And Greg, I'll start with you, and then we can kind of go back and forth with it. Virginia's offense. I don't know if I've ever seen a quarterback go from being flat out one of the best in the country to looking like at times he's never thrown a football before. But the point about the offensive line for Virginia and all of those guys leaving is a valid question. They didn't score a touchdown last week. I don't think I've ever seen a college football game that I watched any part of it that there were no touchdowns scored and it went to double overtime. But Virginia, your take on Virginia's offense and this Carolina defense that we think is improving.
Yeah, well, as David Till told us, Tommy, it just hasn't clicked yet for what Tony Elliott's wanting to do. And
right.
Yeah, that I'd say that's an understatement, right? Some of the fascinating numbers. Yeah, look, the entire offensive line left, and I think maybe their top 3 guys coming back are all banged up. So they literally have had like nobody that has any experience playing. Still recruited, still coached up, still should be better than what they've been. But if you just look at Brennan Armstrong's numbers, if we look at some PFF stuff, last year his overall grade was a 91.8, 57 right now, which is nuts. So last year when he was kept clean, 91.8. When he was blitzed last year, 92.3, really good. This year when he's kept clean, 66. When he's blitzed, down to 47. So we're talking about a 45%. That's almost 50%, guys, drop, which is crazy. Here's the interesting thing, though. Brennan has struggled with some turnovers this year. If you look at what he did last year, he had 21 turnover-worthy plays, represents 3.5% of his passes.
And explain that. What's the turnover-worthy play?
It's just a play where he throws it, and it's either intercepted or he throws it and it should be intercepted. It's not a very smart play. You get fumbles involved in there. So just a bad decision that can lead to a turnover, or maybe it doesn't. And then, of course, you have the big-time throws we've talked about with Drake, where they're tough throws, they're on the money. It's like NFL quality passes. So last year, turnover-worthy plays, he had 21 of them, which is a lot. This year, he's on about the same track. He's got 15 of them. So really about the same, but they've hurt him a lot worse this year because last year he had 35 big-time throws. This year he's got 11. So his worst has stayed about the same. He just is not having the success throwing the ball. Robert and I, as Jason said earlier, is at Syracuse having a lot of success with that offense. So maybe that plays a role. But he has just really struggled. And he's, as you said earlier, Tommy, he's got a ton of weapons at his disposal, but just has no confidence whatsoever. Part of that is because not understanding the scheme the way he needs to, the lack of an offensive line. And if you don't know your scheme and you're struggling with your offensive line, it really doesn't matter how good your skill position guys are if you can't get them the ball in space and timing and all those kinds of things. And Virginia's averaging 14.4 points per game in ACC play. No, excuse me, against FBS competition. I mean, that's phenomenal.
As Jason rebuilds the set there, are you back on there? I mean,
I'm alive, guys.
Is the goblins are still in your house?
Good Lord.
I mean,
I'm alive.
This is an interesting thing I want to know about, and I don't know if I can ask the question coherently. Greg, you mentioned when he was clean last year, he was 90 or whatever. But when he's clean this year, he's only in the 60s. Jason, clean is clean, right? Or is offensive scheme, huge, especially in college football?
Yes. So again, it's a matter of match between what your talent can do in scheme. Is any scheme can work with the right personnel. Right? That's the thing. Any proven scheme. So you can go out there. I mean, Paul Johnson put up filthy numbers in different years with the right quarterback and the right talent at Georgia Tech for that offense. And then you put a completely different scheme there with those players, with the same players that put up great numbers, and they have trouble scoring 20 points a game. They might score 50 with Paul Johnson and 20 with somebody else because the match between the talent and the scheme matters a lot. So that's part of it. The other thing, though, is that, talent has to be – you have to have enough talent that your guys can actually be reliable winning one-on-ones and doing some of the things that you need to do in modern football. And you also have to be able to block. And that's the biggest problem that Virginia's had this year, honestly. And Greg, I haven't looked at it, but you've got the numbers right in front of you. What's the pressure rate that he's facing, or how different are his numbers against actual pressure? Because that's the thing. It's not even a matter of blitz. I want to know what his numbers are against pressure. I can pull it up, but you've got it right in front of you.
Yeah, so under pressure, which is about 40% of his dropbacks, which is a lot.
That's crazy.
46% or 46 grade, but he's completing 46% of his passes, 3 touchdowns, 7 interceptions.
And last year, what was the percentage of pressure?
26.
Huge difference.
77.5 grade there. 45% completion rate, but 0 interceptions, I think, which is the big number there.
Yeah, I mean, if you are looking at almost a 20% increase in pressure rate, so that's not even a matter of like teams are blitzing. That's just a matter of teams are actually making him uncomfortable in the pocket or making him pull it and have to scramble or whatever. That's not just about those plays either. Because when a quarterback gets into the habit of he's constantly under duress, even when those guys aren't there, if every other, and that's almost 50% of the snaps that he drops back, he's under pressure. Those other 50%, when you're not under pressure, you're still looking for it. You're still feeling it because it's there all the time. So I think that's the other thing, is that match between scheme and talent matter. And I've gotten the impression in watching Virginia this year that there's a mismatch between what they want to do and what they've got on the roster. But the other thing is, when you watch them, they can't block a soul. So, that combination is going to lead to some pretty bad overall offensive results.
So how does Gene Chizik take advantage of those numbers? People in the chat are saying, well, Chizik doesn't blitz or whatever, which I'd probably argue that a little bit, especially lately. But how do you if Gene Chizik is sitting in his office looking at the same numbers you're looking at, what's he do on Saturday?
Well, I don't think you need to send a ton of pressure. I mean, maybe one extra person, because you do have to protect yourself on the back end. But as Jason said, they struggle to block just 4 guys. And when you add a blitzer in there, it really kind of gets them out of sort. And look, we've talked a lot before, Tommy. If you can get a negative play, that really changes the dynamic of what an offense can do. And so I think Gene will be conservative here, but also think he understands that you can really get this game going the wrong direction for Virginia if you're able to have some success and able to get to Brennan and make some bad decisions. We know he's a good quarterback. This is kind of all in his head right now. And you want to take advantage of that, but you don't want to get burned on the back end, because everybody remembers what he did last year. I mean, 3 yards, school record against UNC. He's capable. The thing I want to point out, though, I mentioned matchups matter. Virginia's not a very good offensive team, as we've discussed, but we've talked a lot about the bend don't break aspect. Virginia ranks 125th nationally in red zone touchdown percentage at 40%. Now we can play with stats a little bit, and that number sounds bad, but if you have a ton of red zone attempts, all right, I mean, you can live with that, right? Virginia doesn't. Virginia's 93rd with 27 attempts. So not only are they rarely getting into the red zone, they're not actually scoring touchdowns when they get there. When you're going against the Gene Chizik defense, I mean, he's got to be just salivating, because North Carolina has been pretty good in terms of limiting what teams do once they get into the red zone. And so I think that just sets up very well for Carolina. And as long as you limit those explosive plays, and that's why I say he understands he can get to Brennan and make some game-changing plays. But as long as you don't really screw up down the field and you make Virginia march, they've proven they're going to have a really hard time scoring enough points to match what Phil Longo and Drake May and those guys are trying to put up.
A lot of bend don't break. Jason, last week everybody talked about putting Carolina's corners on an island and sending the house to stop the run against Pittsburgh. We saw in the first half at Pitt, especially, why that wasn't ideal.
But they stuck with it. That's the thing. It was ideal because you're willing to give up those long plays for a few of them, as long as they don't run the football on you and control that game the way that they wanted to. They gave up some big plays. That's fine. But how many of those big plays went for scores?
And that was due to Slovis just not being very good.
Exactly. And that's what you counted on is, okay, even if they hit those big plays, you're still going to have a chance in the red zone. And with Slovis, he's probably going to miss a few of them eventually. And guess what? In the second half, he did.
Oh.
And so that was the dice roll that you're going to take is, you know what? Well, you might win 4 or 5 of these. They might lead to 28, 31 points. That's fine. But we are not going to let you be two-dimensional and make it easy on you. We're going to force that quarterback who we think, you might get 5 of them. But if you throw 10, that's going to require that you throw 10 or 12 of them with that quarterback. And if, you throw 11 of those to get 5 of them, well, we'll take it, but you're not scoring on those other 5 drives because now you're in long yardage. So you're willing to take that. You're willing to make that exchange. This week, I think it's the exact opposite. Like Greg said, when you've got a team that's struggling to block as much as they are, then the one thing that you don't want to give up is big plays, especially with Armstrong actually being able to throw the football pretty well. I mean, he's shown that he can do it. I mean, he had 550 yards against Carolina last year. What you want to do against this team is, all right, let's see if you can run it on us.
Yep.
You know, have fun with that. And then once you're in, second and 8 and third and 10, let's see if you can actually complete the pass against our, drop 7 or drop 8, while these 3 guys are gonna get pressure on you, despite the fact that you're keeping 6 guys in to protect. When teams can't block, you actually need to bring less pressure, because you usually can get that kind of pressure without blitzing. That's what gives you the advantage. You can keep that extra guy or 2 in coverage.
And don't let them off the hook with the
That's
easy
right.
big play.
Yep.
So folks that are wondering, Jason said do the exact opposite of what Carolina did last week. Force Virginia to run the ball, or try to run the ball, and don't let Armstrong get hot. We talked about confidence and all with the quarterback and not figuring it out and couldn't get it. Said the same thing about Tyler Van Dyke going into that game too, and he had a pretty good game and hadn't had one since. We'll see how it works. Before I switch off the defense, let me ask one question. George Jenkins' question has been laying out here, and Jason, give us the nutshell version. Jason, can you talk about the power end? Heard a lot of that mentioned now that Noah Taylor and Des Evans and all these guys are out. Just sort of break down that position in this North Carolina defense.
Yeah, the thing to remember is that Carolina is running a kind of a hybrid front. So most modern defenses are not true 4 down or 3 down defenses. Most modern defenses have 3 bigger defensive linemen, so kind of 2 big defensive tackle types, and then a third that's often a hybrid between a defensive tackle and a defensive end. That's going to be the power end or the big end on one side, and that guy's oftentimes going to be put on a side where his job is more to set the edge and to be more of a run stopping type defensive end. And then on the other side, you have the rush end or the jack, or there's any number of things that you call that guy. And I have to keep it straight every time I'm talking about a different team, because every team has their own thing. You got the bandit going back to Vic Koenig days, is the same position. And the other end is that it's basically a rush end where that guy is a hybrid between a defensive end and an outside linebacker. And he might put his hand on the ground sometimes. He might be in a 2-point stance sometimes. If you're going to drop a guy in coverage, that's more likely to be the guy that's going to drop if you zone blitz, or if you drop 8 in coverage, that sort of thing. But the power end is basically, again, the guy that's going to be able to hold up a little bit more. He's usually north of 265 area. And is going to be carrying more of a run stopping role in that defense. That's what he does.
And we're thinking, and Ritzy is the guy that slides to that.
Yeah.
So everybody understands how it works. You're right about all the different names. It's funny to me.
And Jacoby Cowan is another guy that can play that position. And they recruited him really to play that position as much as any.
Good deal. Let's talk about the offense. It's about, good gracious, time flies when it's fun, boys. Let's talk about Virginia's defense against Carolina's offense. We know what to expect from North Carolina. We can talk about that a little bit, but let me pop up a question. Greg, you've got the numbers in front of you. Michael Daniels says, what is UVA defense good at? If I said that in front of my pops, he would slap me upside the head with that dangling preposition out there. But Mike, we get the question. Absolutely. Greg, what did the numbers say?
Well, Virginia, the fact that they've made the turnaround they have has been quite impressive. But Virginia has kind of made their hay with being really good in the red zone and being really good in coverage. Pass defense is fantastic, but they kind of give up some at the front. They're not great against the run, and they're 13th in the ACC in tackles for loss. They've only got 45. So they haven't been able to get a ton of pressure, although they do have a good number of sacks, but they haven't been able to get a lot of wins at the line of scrimmage, especially against the run. But as I said, with the red zone defense part of things for Gene Chizik, the opposite applies as well. And if North Carolina wants to turn this into a blowout, they've got to capitalize in the red zone, because North Carolina ranks 5th nationally in red zone touchdown percentage at 80.6%. That's incredible. Virginia counters, however, they rank 8th nationally in red zone touchdown defense, and only allowing touchdowns on 42% of those opportunities. So that's really what you want to be looking for when Carolina gets into the red zone, who wins those battles? The only way Virginia stays in this game is if they make North Carolina kick more field goals and score touchdowns in the red zone. Virginia's been very good with that. But I think this is really a game that plays the Phil Longo's advantage. Once again, yeah, you got Drake. We know that. But Virginia has shown a propensity to want to do a good job kind of limiting passes down the field. So Carolina will be able to run the ball somewhat effectively. At least they should. If you let Carolina run the ball and give Drake May a lot of second and shorts and third and shorts, good luck to you.
It sounds like Virginia may, in fact, have a bend don't break defense.
They really
Jason?
do. And they're right now they're number 2 in the country in number of plays given up over 30 yards. Only Iowa has given up fewer plays over 30 yards. And I'm guessing Iowa, and having given up 4 plays over 30 yards, I bet you their offense has even fewer than that. But Virginia has only given up 6 plays over 30 yards on the season. So,
Which is impressive.
that's pretty good. I mean, by comparison, I mean, North Carolina, you get complaints about North Carolina playing bend but don't break. Carolina's given up 16.
So Virginia's getting up 6 big plays or over 30 yards. So last week, Jason, I put you in Chiswick's office doing a game plan for the defense. What's Carolina's offensive game plan here going up against this Virginia defense?
Patience. Everything. What I'm preaching to Drake May all week is take whatever's there, take it right away, take what they're going to give you. Don't try to force the issue. You know, if in doubt on the RPO type stuff, hand it off. Just this gets back to, the idea that if you're going to play this kind of a team with this kind of offense, one of the things that you have to kind of do in playing complementary football is you have to realize, like, do we need to score 40 to beat this team? Right? That's something that, as an offensive coordinator, yeah, you want to score 45, you want to score 50 every game. At the same time, if you're playing against a team like this that hasn't scored over 20 in an ACC game yet, you go, okay, look, you tell your quarterback, look, as long as we don't turn the football over, as long as we don't get stupid, we're fine. We're going to score points. So take care of the football, take what's there, be happy, taking a 5-yard gain if it's there. Just keep giving your guys a chance and you're fine. So I am very much running the football. If I'm Phil Longo in this game, I'm emphasizing the run game as I'm able. I'm running a lot of my, base quick game in the passing game, giving Drake May throws that he's really comfortable with that are not putting the ball in jeopardy. And just, it's okay to punt a couple times in this game. What you can't do is turn the football over. You turn the ball over and you bring this team into the game. If you don't turn the ball over, I don't think Virginia can beat you.
Tommy, as an extension of that, I'm curious to see how aggressive Mac is on those 4th and shorts. Because to Jason's point, I mean, if you've got the ball at midfield and your defense is playing okay, and maybe you've got a lead, if you don't get that 4th down, now you're giving Virginia a big boost offensively. But if you go ahead and kick it, and they've got to go 90, 85 yards, there's a pretty good chance that they're going to kick it right back to you, and you're going to have even better field position. So not to go completely conservative, but I don't know that there's the sense that this team has had at times in Boone, against Notre Dame, against Duke, where you have to score every single possession. So I think Jason's spot on accurate with those comments.
Jeff asked a question. So Mac needs to kick field goals and take the points this week. I think it might be the case, right, Greg?
I do. I think you want to build a lead. A 2-possession lead in this game is going to seem like a lot. I mean, it's almost like playing Virginian basketball, right? I mean, if you got an 8-point lead, it's massive.
So I want to get to the predictions, but there's a question that's been laying out there that I want to get both your takes on here, and it's kind of a long one, and it's probably going to jack up the formatting here, but I'm going to throw it up here. Alan Mullinax asks, and Greg, you can hit it first. First 46, and I'm trusting these numbers. I'm trusting that these numbers are accurate because I freely admit I haven't looked, but it sounds good. Mac and Larry Fedora, both 28 and 18 in their first 46. What's the biggest differences between the two eras? Greg, you covered both extensively.
Well, Larry Fedora was very open about it privately, and he even acknowledged it a bit publicly. But Carolina should have won a lot more than 8 games in 2012. And why? Because he had a lot of really good talent. That 2013 defense was really good because they had guys like Kareem Martin. And so Fedora walked into a situation. Yes, it was NCAA investigation. Yes, he had a lot to deal with. So give him a lot of credit for that. But he had a lot of weapons at his disposal. And while Fedora did a good job recruiting offensively throughout his tenure, other than quarterback, which really hurt him the last couple of years, when Matt came in, there wasn't much there at all defensively. But they had some good pieces offensively. They just needed to get a quarterback. Sam Howell comes in and you're off to the races. So Fedora had a lot more talent at his disposal. Mac has not. Those are the main things for me. What you got, Jason?
Yeah, you hit on most of what I would say is, and that's that for the most part, Fedora treaded water from when he got on campus through those first few years. That first year, like you said, he came in and I will go to my grave thinking that 2010 team should have played in the national championship. They had that much talent.
Tommy Thigpens agrees with you.
Yeah. I mean, that team, that 2010 team, but for some stupid social media stuff, I think plays in the national championship. They had that level of talent on campus. And a lot of those guys were still around in 2012, like you said. The biggest difference to me between Mac and Larry is not just recruiting quality, but it's recruiting priorities. And the thing that Mac does is he puts a premium on recruiting the line of scrimmage. That's where they've brought in a ton of bodies. If you look at this roster versus the roster that Larry had his, I guess this would be fourth year, or this is fifth year now. I can't even remember. I'm getting old.
Fourth year, yeah.
Yeah, this is fourth year. In Larry's fourth year, if you compared the defensive line, just if you had them walk off the bus, and then you had Mac's guys walk off the bus, they look real different. And the same thing on the offensive line, actually. Generally, Larry did a pretty good job recruiting the offensive line, but I think there's more overall offensive line talent on this roster than there was in 2012. So I think the overall line of scrimmage talent is the biggest difference between the two. And I think Mac has been more committed to playing complementary football, though I think both programs, both Mac and Larry, have had some issues having the level of physicality and buy-in on that side of things to really take the next step as a program. And, we'll see if Mac is able to kind of get over the hump on that. But yeah, those would be the things that I would say the biggest differences.
Yeah, and
I
Tommy,
think your point about the recruiting priorities is a big one. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I was just going to say, looking at the 2015 depth chart, which I had handy for some reason, that starting defensive line was Junior Nonconde, a defensive end, Mikey Bart, a defensive end, Nazir Jones, who was a sophomore that year.
Good player.
And then Tyler Powell and Jeremiah Clark, who was a redshirt freshman. So some good guys there, some young guys on the interior. And then I think on the end, guys that battled, but they weren't uber talented guys by any stretch. Certainly not like what North Carolina has right now.
I remember, didn't Chizik say Mikey Bart's my favorite player because he's available?
His best ability is availability. Yeah.
I remember that when they dealt with all those injuries and stuff. It's been fun. That is
the best part of that, Tommy, was the question. What do you like about Mikey Bart? Well, he's available.
Lord have mercy.
That speaks to it right there. I mean, those guys, Hey, 11-1 in the regular season, and probably should have been 12-1 after the ACC championship game. I try not to think about those days, but that Baylor game, I still think it was closer than it looked, Greg. Remember us having that article,
I
that
know
argument.
that was a
It may be closer than it looked, but it looked really, really distant. So, I mean, that's a pretty low bar you're setting there, Tommy.
Yeah, but shout out to Alan Mullinax for a great question, a good way to end the podcast. We try to work everything in for you guys, and like I said, the Iron 285. We need the Iron 300 to get in here next time. But it's been fun. It's been the Game Plan
Are we doing
podcast.
the predictions?
I'm not going out of here without predictions because I love getting y'all's guys on the record because I'm on the record this year and I'm claiming it. Jason, what happens on Saturday?
North Carolina's going to win the football game. Only question is how many points handicap have to get assigned to Carolina because this is Mac Brown in Charlottesville.
good question. Yeah.
There is no curse. Don't believe in curses.
That's the real question. So I'm going to go with a 14-point handicap for Mac Brown in Charlottesville. And I think Carolina still wins this game. I'm going to go with a relatively low-scoring game compared to what Carolina's been playing in, but still enough points scored that Drake May's going to get his four scores and 70 yards sort of thing. He's I'm going to go with let's say 38. Carolina, let's say we'll go 38 to 12.
12. Like
It's
is that
Virginia.
is that a touchdown, a field goal, and a safety?
That's what they
I
did
don't
last
know.
week.
I'm just going with 12 because I know Virginia has not scored a touchdown in the last 2 ACC games. So I'm trying not to put up multiples of 7 up there because I'm not so sure about that.
Over under on touchdowns, Virginia scores, Greg.
Well, they haven't given up a touchdown since October 8th, I don't think.
Yeah, it works both ways, folks.
It does. It does. As we said earlier, Virginia's averaging 14 points per game against FBS opponents. On the flip side, they're only allowing 22 points per game. Granted, they haven't seen a Drake May-led offense quite yet. So I think it's just going to be difficult. And the only way Virginia keeps this close is if the curse comes back in roaring fashion and there's a bunch of turnovers. Go back to 96. Carolina had that one in hand, and just a really bad turnover changed the game. So it can happen. I don't think it will happen. I think Carolina has kind of learned to play on the road, and they are playing better defensively. So I think this is one of those where maybe it's closer than people like at halftime, but Carolina is able to pull away in the second half and win comfortably. I'm going to go 34-17 North Carolina.
Yeah, so you and I are on the same page in terms of I was looking at the Louisville game as this game will probably look something like that game, and Louisville won 34-17. I just don't think they'll score 17 with the way they've been playing offensively.
Look, my son's first game was 7-5 in Keenan Stadium.
2005, Al Groh, baby.
Yeah, and the only thing he remembers is the flyover. I remember the game, and
That was probably the best part of that afternoon.
It was the best flyover they've ever had. I think Carolina, to your point, has learned to win on the road, and this team will handle business. The title of this podcast, North Carolina needs to handle business. I think they will handle business. Not picking a score because there's no pictures on the scoreboard. It's just W's and L's, and so Carolina gets to 8-1. Last question before we get out of here. Who y'all got, Tennessee or Georgia? Jason.
Georgia.
I might be contrarian. No, it's at Georgia. Yeah, I'll take Georgia. Alabama, LSU.
Bama.
But that one I think LSU has a better shot of beating Bama than Tennessee does Georgia.
Yep, I agree.
Florida State, Miami. Jason.
I'm going with FSU, but closer than the experts think.
Miami's good defensively, but yeah, that offense is.
I don't think FSU is going to get the Miami team that's played the last couple weeks. That'll be a rivalry game, and they're going to have to go out and actually win that game.
Where is it? Is it at Miami?
It's at Doak South, so in Miami.
Okay. Well, it's at the Orange Bowl. That's a cool stadium, by the way. It was a very fun trip. All right, boys, let's get out of here. It's 10:10 on Thursday night. It's been the Game Plan Podcast sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Somebody asked earlier, if all these things happen, does Carolina get to the playoffs? There's a game Saturday. Worry about that game Saturday. The day Carolina's in the college
not impossible at this stage. When you got Drake May in your pocket,
things happen.
You got a shot. You got a puncher. I was on another podcast this week that asked me about this, and I said, you know what? North Carolina is like that boxer who has the super powerful, right hand or left hand, who might not be the best boxer. You got to have defense for that. But in terms of being able to, potentially win any matchup, you land that right hand and they could potentially knock anybody out. And that Drake May is that.
And he's got 3 second half comebacks in the last 6 games. That's strong for the young man as well, beyond just the stats.
Yeah, it's a crazy run. But I got to talk to you off the air, Jason. Did you cheat on us this week?
No, this was another thing. They know I do some. We talked about all sorts of stuff, all the way down to Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, and North Carolina came up on there. So if anything, we may have pulled a few folks over from them.
All right, yeah, they were. I loved hearing Lane Kiffin talking his press conference, saying he's going to dress up like a clown, he guesses. All right, I'm getting out of here.
Yeah.
He is hilarious. All right, boys, it's been a Game Plan. Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Appreciate everybody joining us. Appreciate us. Inside Carolina Live, I guess, at 9 o'clock Saturday morning, live from CHL Studios. Carolina kicks off at 12 noon in Scott Stadium. We'll be back at 8 a.m. on Sunday with the day after. Y'all take care.